So, the wilderness, hungry mouth that consumes us. It's the place where God speaks and carries us. It's a place where his provision sustains us day by day, but it's meant to leave a mark on us. We're meant to learn lessons that we then carry into the next season. So that's the nature of the wilderness. We're going to think about the tests in the wilderness. Again, in Deuteronomy 8, that's one of God's refrains. I did this to humble you and to test you. So, of course, for this, we'll jump to Jesus and Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. So, Matthew 4. Let's have a little read from Matthew 4. And then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple. And he said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said, "Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, the angels came and were ministering to him. So I think the first test in the wilderness is to do with provision. As we said, Jesus fasted for 40 days, for 40 nights, and he's hungry. So it's kind of a logical thing, right? Okay, where's the food? The fast has come to an end, and now let's eat. It's interesting, isn't it? God's provision in the wilderness. He allows us to hunger, and then he meets that need. We were talking in the tea break. I don't think really, particularly in our Western society, we actually know what hunger is. We kind of have this gentle rumbling, and then we feel it. I'm always amazed whenever we do have a fast, kind of actually, once you push through the initial kind of chaos of it, actually your body's not as bad as it kind of made out it was at the beginning. But we're just so used to having everything on hand. I remember in COVID going to the supermarkets, like, I'm going to bake a cake. But of course, everyone was baking cakes in COVID, so there's no flour. I was outraged. So what do you mean there's not flour on the shelves? And I was just sort of thinking, this is a really unique experience in humanity that I'm so used to walking to a supermarket and buying whatever I fancy. That's a rare experience. The majority of humans have hungered. The majority of humans have thirsted, and they've not had what they wanted, and they've been blessed if they've got what they need to sustain themselves. So it's this test of provision. And this test is to teach us that what we think we need is not what we need. We need something else. You don't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. So we're going to jump to John 6, and I'm aware I'm moving around a lot in the biblical text, but hopefully it will all kind of pull in the same direction. This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant interaction between Jesus and the crowds in John 6. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and you had your fill. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval." Then they asked him, "What must we do to do the works God requires?" Jesus answered, "The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent." It's just so beautifully simple, isn't it? What does God want you to do? Believe. We're so good at adding a long list of things to that and doing anything but believing. But anyway, that's not the point of today's message. Jesus answered, "The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent you. So they asked him, "What sign will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." I am amazed at the graciousness of Jesus. If you think through what happened yesterday, in this passage yesterday, Jesus is teaching the crowds in an isolated place, and the disciples work out, you've gone on long, everyone's getting hungry, we're in a deserted place, there's nowhere to get food, you need to send people on their way. And Jesus says, "Well, what have you got?" And they go, "Well, there's this boy's packed lunch here," and he feeds 5,000 with it. And then disperse the crowds, Jesus goes off to pray, walks on the water, they get to the other side, everyone wakes up in the next morning going, "God, that meal was great. That was brilliant. Let's make him king." Anyone that can produce that level of food should be king. That level of food security is everything we need. Let's go find him and make him king. And they go, "Rabbi." He's like, "Don't call me teacher. You're not here for the teaching. You're here for the food. You've found me out because you ate and you had your fill." And then they get into this back and forth. And then they say to Jesus, the audacity to say to Jesus, "What sign will you give that we may see?" Now, if I was Jesus, I would have gone, "That bit of flour that's still stuck in your beard, and that fish breath you've got, like, do you remember yesterday when I fed you? Do you remember the sign you literally saw yesterday?" And I come to Jesus. Moses gave our ancestors manna. What are you going to give us? Jesus is like, "You're still full from what I gave you yesterday, and yet you're challenging me." And then the chapter, if you read on, just descends into chaos, because Jesus is trying to talk to them about the bread of life, the eternal word that can sustain them through this life and into eternity. And they're like, "The bread we ate yesterday is being digested. We want some more." And it's like this kind of deliberate, I think, from Jesus, kind of mismatch of conversation where they're talking about one kind of bread, but he is trying to get them to understand, no, there's another kind of bread you should be looking for. He goes on to say, "Very truly, I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it was my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." "Sir," they said, "always give us this bread." Then Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But as I told you, you have seen me, and still you do not believe. In a deserted place, I have provided you bread to show you that I am the Father are one. I'm redoing that Exodus miracle so you can understand where I've come from. You've held it in your hands, you've felt it in your belly, and yet still you won't believe." He gets very blunt then in verse 48. "I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, yet they died." It's like, stop harping on about the miracle you think Moses did. It sustained them for one day, and now they're all dead. I'm trying to talk to you about eternal provision. I'm trying to talk to you about bread that will keep you forever, not just trying to give you the next hit and fill into your belly. He said, "Here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and not die. I'm the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world." Then the Jews began to argue sharply among themselves, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" I think in our wilderness situations, we're looking for one kind of provision because we feel the lack, and we feel it quite acutely. Whenever we've got a day of fasting coming up next weekend at church, and I'm like, oh, for goodness sake, I love my food. Just love my food. And the moment that you wake up on the fast day and you don't have breakfast, and my stomach's like, oh, that's interesting. Like, okay, that's fine. No, cool. Yeah, it's all right. It's good. let's do school run. Mid-morning snack's coming, and then you get to mid-morning snack and you feel the anxiety rising, like, dude, what's happening? Like, we've not eaten since last night. Like, by lunchtime, my body's screaming, we're going to die. I'm literally going to collapse in the afternoon meeting if you don't give me some food. And then kind of by the evening, it's just sobbing in a corner, like, you don't love me anymore. But, once you push that, you wake up the next day and you're like, actually, I'm a little bit hungry, but this wasn't as urgent as my body was telling me. And actually now, there's something else that I'm starting to experience. As I put the temporal to one side, I'm starting to realize actually there is a spiritual life that I so desperately need, much more than I need this food that my body is screaming for. I think in our wilderness experiences, we're often praying to God, meet my felt need. God, this is what I need. Like, Jesus, I'm hungry. The devil's like, it's logical, you're hungry, eat bread. And Jesus goes, actually, there's something else that man needs. Having my immediate needs relieved is not what I need in this wilderness experience. I actually need something else. Again, another wilderness season for me, because I'm the last one of 6. My parents are kind of quite elderly in that sense. They're both in their mid-80s. I know it's a number, but they are elderly in their 80s. We've watched my mum for the last 4 years really kind of decline with dementia. And she's been in care homes, she's been in hospital this year. She's now kind of stuck in an emergency bed while they try and work out what to do with her. And it's a real kind of, again, it's that draining experience of here we go again. Let's go do the visit again. Let's see what we're dealing with today. And all my family are looking at me like, well, you're the pastor. Like, oh, can you pray? Can you fix this? And I'm like I'm out. I got nothing here. But I think I've learned to say, okay, God, I'm going to stop praying for what I think I need you to do in this situation, because you're not doing it. I'm asking you to meet these felt needs. I'm asking you to provide this care place, or get her out of this hospital, or do this. And actually, that's not happening. So maybe I'm asking you to meet a felt need, but actually there's something spiritual that you're trying to do amidst this circumstance. There's a bread of life that you're trying to get me to understand. It would be really nice if I click my fingers and suddenly your mother's in a beautiful home and is calm and peaceful and serene. But actually, you and your family right now, there's a different kind of bread you need. I can't say I've reconciled that and got to the point where I'm like, yeah, I know what that bread is and now I'm enjoying it. But I think I've just come to a place of, God, there's something spiritual that I need here. For the first time in, I can't remember now. The first time in ages, a few weeks ago, Mum let me pray with her. I can't remember praying with Mum. That's not been a regular feature of our kind of relationship and spiritual life. And yet, God, you're doing something. There's something that's happening here that is not what I want to happen, because it's not making my life any easier, and it's not kind of meeting the needs that I am screaming out to you with. But there's a different kind of bread. I think the test of provision in the wilderness is, what are we asking God for? What are we expecting him to do? I visited my friend who was leading a church in London a few years ago, and Renewal, we're blessed a bit like you guys here, just with fabulous buildings that, you walk in, you turn the lights on, and most Sundays everything works and you just kind of crack on. My friend was leading a church that was meeting in a theatre venue. They had to get in at 5 o'clock in the morning. They'd got 20 guys on their setup team. So I was like, I'll come at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'll kind of see how you guys do it. And like he's saying to me, I just wish we had a building like Renewal. I just wish we had that provision. This is kind of such hard work. But I watched these guys from 5 o'clock till kind of 9:30, set everything up, get all the equipment off the lorry, set up the tech, set up the kids' room, set up everything. And then at 9:45, the first 2-3 rows are just filled with guys who've been working for this since 5 o'clock in the morning. And they are pumped. And I'm like, the first 2 rows at Renewal, 15 minutes after the service has begun, it's just like this wasteland. And people just casually stroll in. Oh, we've started. Great, I'll come. I'm like, I want to sell our building. Because what I would give to have 20 guys who 15 minutes before the service are going like, we've worked hard for this, we're praying for this, we're expecting God to do something this morning. Like, I would rather have that kind of provision than this provision where everything's just easy. Again, like in our promised land, we're just forgetting when people were sacrificing holidays to build the building. We were just forgetting when the budget was so stretched and the mortgage was so big and we were like, how are we ever going to pay this? We've got past all of that pain. And it's interesting, my friends like this, like I'm praying for a venue. I'm like, I can see why, but I just wonder, actually God's provided you something else that is far more dynamic. It's this spiritual life that is surging through your church because of the difficulties that you're in. When we're in our wilderness experiences, God will provide, but the bread that we need is not necessarily the bread we think we need. And that's what Jesus says to the devil. He says, he quotes from Deuteronomy 6, man does not live by bread alone. Meeting my physical need today is not the point. There's a spiritual life that's got to flow. It's what Jesus is trying to get the crowds in John 6 to understand. Yes, I know you're hungry. Yes, I know you're on the bread line. Yes, I know you are kind of working hard to eke out an existence in this oppressive environment that you are in. But if I feed you every day, you're still going to die. There's something else that you need. And the tests of the wilderness, the first test is, what are we asking God to do? What is the provision that we are looking for? And he'll allow us to experience a lack somewhere, as I said earlier, to change our value system so that we can experience the value of something else that he's trying to get us to. What that something else is for you in your wilderness, may the Lord be with you and may he reveal that to you. But again, don't be afraid of the lack. Don't be afraid of the hunger. It won't kill you today. You'll be okay. Try and seek for the bread that comes from him. The second test of the wilderness, the devil takes Jesus to the highest point of the temple. And he says, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself off, for his angels will catch you and bear you up. And Jesus says, you shall not test the Lord your God. That would have been spectacular. I mean, the temple was kind of the heart of city life in Jerusalem, right? So there was all the hustle and bustle of the courts. There's all the worshippers coming and going. There's kind of all the stalls and the marketplaces around outside it. So for somebody to throw themselves off the top and not die, like if you're going to prove you are the Son of God, that's a great introduction. Like just float down in front of the temple like, ta-da, I'm here. But Jesus says, actually, in the desert, it's not for us to test God. God's testing us. Actually, the wilderness is not where we test God. He quotes from Deuteronomy again. Do not test the Lord your God, Deuteronomy 6:16, as you did at Massah. So we're going to jump to Exodus 17. I did tell you we were jumping around a bit. I really hope we're doing it in a way that kind of everyone can lock in. But if I lose you, give me a wave, ask me a question, tell me to slow down, tell me to recap, whatever you need. Exodus 17. So this is the middle of the people of Israel's journey through the wilderness of sin. All the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of sin by stages, according to the commandments of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore, the people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. And Moses said, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? But the people thirsted there for water. And the people grumbled against Moses and said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? So Moses cried to the Lord, what shall I do with this people? They're almost ready to stone me. The Lord said to Moses, pass on before the people. Taking with you some of the elders of Israel, take in your hand the staff which you struck the Nile and go. Behold, I will send you before there at the rock of Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, because they tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" If the first test of the wilderness is to test what we're relying on and what provision we're looking for from God, then the second test is, are we going to test God in the wilderness or not? And Jesus says, hey, our ancestors made this mistake. They tested God, saying, if God is with us, and yet in Deuteronomy 6, Moses said, do not test the Lord your God as you did at Massah. Again, I find this fascinating because I think there's resonances with the people in John 6. So Exodus 17, they're asking for water. Exodus 15 is where God parts the sea and they walk through on dry ground. And they turn around and they watch their enemies drown. Exodus 16, God provides them manna. And they go through this whole drama of God saying, I will give you, when you wake up in the morning, there will be bread for the day outside your tent. But don't collect more than 1 day's bread. And what do? They store it all up and then it rots. And God's like, no, I'm providing day by day. And then they're like, this bread's nice, but it's just missing some meat. We just need some chicken in this bread. Like, it's chicken flatbread. Come on, Jesus. It's the Middle East. Come on, let's do this. So then this quail kind of magically kind of appears. So they've got this bread and meat to eat. And then they're like, we've got no water. Now, I like to think, if this was me, but maybe this is my arrogance, I like to think if this was me, I would be like, wow, look what God did for main course. Like this food's appeared out of nowhere. What's going to be his trick with the drink? How's he going to do that? Like, he's split the sea, he's miraculously provided bread and meat. Where's the drinks coming from? Like, he's going to have a little umbrella in and a curly straw, and maybe it's going to have, different colours. Like, this is going to be epic. But they quarrel with God and go, is God among us or not? Like, again, if I was God, I'd turn the table over at that point. I'm like, what more do you want me to do? Like, how much more physical proof in front of your eyes do you need of my goodness and my faithfulness to you? And yet, you hit another lack and you start complaining, oh God, is God with us? Is God with us? I like to think that I wouldn't be that person testing God. I would go, I've seen everything God's done before. This is going to be amazing. But I know I'm not. So obviously I told you about Frankie, my daughter, and then when my wife became pregnant with our son, Charlie, I felt God speak, because I was a bit apprehensive, not least because I'd forgotten the conversation we'd had about trying for 2. So I was a little bit surprised when my wife appeared in the bedroom very excited one morning. I kind of muttered something, rolled over and went back to sleep. I was like, oh no. And I was a little bit anxious. Okay, how is this going to go? And I felt the Spirit of God speak to me. This won't be the same as last time. I was like, okay, this is going to be fine. Whilst my daughter was being born, the church renewal, we went through a very difficult time in leadership that I couldn't really understand why. It didn't make any sense to me whatsoever, and everything I thought was kind of right and where we were going suddenly wasn't. And I felt like we were approaching another season in renewal where I was like, how is this going to go? And I felt like these words, it won't be the same this time, kind of applied to both family life and to church life. And so we went for a kind of the routine scan, and everything was okay. And then because of our history, we were seen by the early pregnancy clinic. And at 20 weeks, we went in for a scan, and the consultant said, I'm really sorry, Mrs. Towler, your cervix is completely dilated. So we need to admit you. We'll put a stitch in tomorrow. You're going to have to stay in hospital on bed rest now, probably for at least 6 weeks, if not longer. So I'd go home, pack her a bag, take it in, explain to my then 2-year-old, Mummy's okay, but she's not going to be here for a while. Respect to single parents out there. I did it for 6 weeks. It's hard work. Man, when you suddenly realize everything's on you, there is nobody else thinking about this. There is nobody else. Now, the church were marvelous, and they just rallied around us like God's people do. And then at work, one of my closest kind of colleagues and friends in work, she had a spinal injury and had an infection in between her discs. And she was in hospital, but she was in a completely different hospital. And I couldn't get to go. And I was like, God, what's happening? Like, church is falling, it seems like it's falling apart again. And I walked down this canal that's near us, and I remember going, God, you told me this would be okay, and this is not my version of okay. Like, where are you, and what are you doing? And I felt just the gentle rebuke of the Spirit. Is this how you're going to react when it doesn't go your way? I was like, I failed that test. Because I have seen God's goodness and faithfulness. My 2-year-old in front of me is a picture of God's goodness and faithfulness. I've got a whole long life journey of seeing the faithfulness and the goodness of God. 2 years ago, I thought the church might not recover from the crisis we're in, and yet we seem like we are. But the moment I've hit another problem, I'm like, God, where are you? What are you doing? Quarrelled with him like the people of Israel did at Meribah. Like, we're full now, but now we're thirsty. There is a place for lament. There is a place for anger, for questioning God, for saying along with the Psalms, I think as we heard this morning, how long, Lord, what are you doing? The Psalms give us those words to express to God when, he's not doing what we think he should and we're not best pleased about it. That is part of our worship tradition, is to turn up and go, God, we're not best impressed, what are you doing? But I also think we have to be really careful with that. When we're in a wilderness season, to understand that actually God is proving us. He doesn't have to prove himself. The second test of the wilderness is actually, will you forget everything that God has already done for you? Or will you go, God, I don't like this, don't understand this, I'm a little bit miffed, yet I know you are good. Yet I have seen you bring us through before. God even has to say to Moses, you know that staff that parted an ocean? Do you not think that can do things with water? Like, that staff in your hand that split the sea, take that. You're holding something in front of you that shows you I can do things with water. Don't let the people forget my goodness and my faithfulness. When we find ourselves in a wilderness experience, it is okay to lament to God. But I do think we have to be careful around, is God still with us? God, why are you doing this? God, what's going on? I think the test is for us to say, God, we've seen your faithfulness and we trust in you. Now, Jesus is the perfect Adam, isn't he? So we fail all of these tests repeatedly, and we sang his mercy is greater than all. So there's no condemnation. When we find ourselves failing these tests, we come before him with humility and repentance to say, God, I don't want to test you and quarrel. Forgive me my sin. Humble me. Help me understand you're testing me. Keep me from trying to test you. But I think I've tried to learn now, every time things look a bit tricky or a bit difficult, I'm like, let me think back over all that God has done. I find myself with a slightly wry smile on my face when some of our younger leaders at Renewal come to me, and I'm like, I remember Jan. Jan was our kind of executive officer years ago when I started him. It's like, I remember Jan smiling at me like that. I must be kind of getting into my 40s now. Like, I remember Jan rolling her eyes at me like that. Because I'm like, I kind of remember now that feeling of there's somebody in the room who's seen it all before and knows it will be okay. And so I kind of find myself trying to like, listen, let me tell you what God's done in this church over the history. Listen, let me tell you what I've seen God done. You think right now this obstacle is insurmountable. It's really not. Like, we've had worse days. God's brought us through more difficult circumstances. And for your maturity, you've got to learn not to panic, but to cast your mind back. Right, what has God already done? And if he handled that, he will handle this. The wilderness is where God tests us, not where we test God. Then the final test, Matthew 4. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All this I will give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. Jesus said to him, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. So there's a bit of a change in this one. So the first two tests, kind of the strategy is if you are, kind of the devil's questioning Jesus to prove himself. In this third test, the devil's like, let me tell you what I can do for you. If I can't kind of challenge who you are, then let me try and kind of challenge with who I am. Let me tell you, if you just bow down and worship me. And it's the only time Jesus addresses the devil by title is probably more correct than name in that sense. He says, away from me, Satan. There's a bit of a debate as to whether is this the kind of first time Jesus realizes it's the devil? Is kind of the devil kind of lurking in the background in the first two tests, and then suddenly there's other tests that kind of go, no. There's other arguments, and Jesus fully knows who this is. I'm kind of more in that camp, but pays your money, takes your choice. But certainly there comes this moment where Jesus says, actually, Satan, you've lost here. You've overplayed your hand. You've overplayed your card. Again, I think it's interesting what Satan tempts Jesus with. It's not out and out, call me Lord. It's just compromise right now. Hey, let me show you everything. Just fall down and worship me, and I'll give you all of this. It's this idea of kind of just add into the worship of Yahweh. like bow down to me now. I'll give you everything. And then you can kind of carry on as you were. It's very similar to what the people of Israel have been doing. They've been worshipping Yahweh. They've just been adding in other things as well, just to kind of doubly make sure. Because Yahweh, he lets us go hungry every now and again. So we'll just add in a few other gods to worship them. Again, Jesus pulls from Deuteronomy 6:10 to 15. It says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob to give you, with great and good cities that you did not build, and houses full of all the good things that you did not fill, and cisterns that you did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. When you eat and are full, then take care lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It is the Lord your God you shall fear. Him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the people who are around you. For the Lord your God in your midst is a jealous God, lest the anger of the Lord your God be kindled against you, and he destroy you from off the face of the earth. Again, this is the danger that we spoke of earlier, all the splendor of the world, everything that the world can offer you. People, when you've got all of that, don't chase after other gods. And so when the devil shows Jesus all the world can offer, he calls back to this passage, you shall worship the Lord your God alone. There's no room for anything else. I think the people of Israel's journey is fascinating, because they see God do so much, and yet in their hearts, they're still carrying idols and false gods. Even as they're journeying through the desert, even as they're coming into the promised land, they're worshipping Yahweh, but they've still got idols and things in their tents that's just kind of for safekeeping. Just in case Yahweh has an off day. Just in case he doesn't quite make it through. I build this argument from Joshua 24. So at the end of Joshua's life, as he's giving his review of all God has done to the people of Israel, he says this: "Now therefore fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." That "put away the gods your fathers served." Different versions will render it differently, but I think there's a strong drive in literally throw them out. Like, you've got idols that your ancestors served in Egypt, and you've carried them with you all through the desert, all through the conquests in the promised land. You've carried them, I think, physically with you. If that's a push too far, if they haven't physically carried them with them, they've certainly carried them in their hearts. And God is like, now is the time to finally, once and for all, throw out everything else and serve only Yahweh. Again, I just find it amazing that they're carrying these idols with them, seeing all that God has done. Like when the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire is there, when the provision is coming, when the walls of Jericho fall down, there's still someone in God's camp who's going, Yahweh's brilliant, but just in case, I've just got this guy here. Just as my backup plan, in case Yahweh stops. Like, it's fascinating. And again, as you know the story, they forget so quickly. The generation after Joshua doesn't know who God is. They so quickly forget. And we always want to blame the generation that's forgotten. I'm like, yeah, but what about the generation that actually didn't serve wholeheartedly? That didn't remove all the idols from among them, that didn't root out the worship and the trust of other things. Because the human heart is deceitful beyond all measure. And it's really easy for us to, I guess, point at the people of Israel and say, how could you ever go back to worshipping idols when you've seen what Yahweh has done? But then it's really hard, isn't it? To not trust in things that aren't God. Like, even I've worked out when our current senior pastor will retire. I'm about 7 years younger than him. I'm like, what if the next guy doesn't want me hanging around for 7 years? Build a bit of a financial plan so that maybe when he retires, like, I can get a job somewhere else, and just like, what's the pension looking like? Like, am I going to be okay? And then you're like, why am I even thinking about retirement? Because it just won't be a thing by the time I get there. Like, that's, we don't stand a cat and mouse chance of that. But you just suddenly find yourself kind of planning it. You're like, okay, what's my backup plan? What am I relying on? What am I trusting in? What are all the other things that I'm like, God, I serve you and you only, but I'm really glad I've got this. I'm really glad. God, I'm so grateful. It's interesting in Matthew 6 when Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow, sufficient for the day. Again, it's those lessons of the wilderness. Is if you've got what you need for today, you're good. But there's something in the human heart that wants that security of, I'm just going to hang on to a few things. I'd love to serve God wholeheartedly, but there's this little bit I'm reserving for something else. And I think the people of Israel physically carried those idols out of Egypt, through the wilderness, passed them on to the next generation, over the Jordan, into the conquest of the promised land, passed them on to the next generation. If they didn't physically, they certainly did spiritually. And I think Joshua stands up and he's like, boys, last chance. Last chance. If you don't put these away, I'm telling you now, this will not go well for you. And we know the tragic history. They didn't, and it didn't, and they find themselves back into another wilderness. I think the first test, the final test of the wilderness is, how wholehearted are we going to be for God? Are we actually going to be content to be stripped of everything? Jesus must have been so vulnerable in that moment, so hungry, so tired, so thirsty, and yet he refuses to serve anything other than wholehearted worship of God the Father. So I think the first test of the wilderness is about our provision. And are we content to experience lack in one area so that we can experience God's abundance in another? I think the second test of the wilderness is, are we going to forget all that God has done and question whether he's with us or not? Or are we actually going to say, I have enough experience of the loving kindness of God to know that he is good? I think the third test is, are we wholehearted? Are we really going to put away now everything else other than God? Because if we find ourselves carrying anything, it's got grave implications for us and for the next that is to come. Lord, we thank you. You lead us into the wilderness to humble us, to test us, but to do us good in the end. The wilderness is not to prove our goodness, but to remind us of yours. Lord, I know this week I have prayed prayers of provision that are about making my now easier. But God, I pray you would give me and everyone here the grace to understand there's a provision from you that we so desperately need, that will last long beyond the problems we face today. Lord, you have our today problems in your hand. But God, would you move our attention to the bread of life, the eternal life, the eternal provision that we have in you. Lord, we pray that we would remind ourselves of your goodness. By your Spirit in our weakness, would you strengthen us in those moments where we're tempted to throw our hands in the air and go, God, what are you doing? God, where are you? Lord, would you help us in those moments to, rather than quarrel with you, remind ourselves of all you have done yesterday, your goodness and your faithfulness. You have not failed us yet. You have not abandoned us yet. And you have promised to never leave us or forsake us. You've brought us this far. You will continue to lead us on. And God, I pray, if there is something else other than you that we are leaning into, we're relying on, we're carrying in our hearts, God, would you show it to us? May it be revealed. And Lord, would you give us the grace to put it away, to once and for all cast it out, and to serve you and you alone wholeheartedly. In Jesus' name we pray.